Today I will be talking about utilitarianism and animal rights. I will first by introducing my research question and the relevance of that question. I will then go on to explain the concepts I'm using, so animal rights and utilitarianism. I will then move on to three utilitarian perspectives that I will be using today, those of Jeremy Bentham, Peter Singer and John Stuart Mill, and then finally I will conclude with my final remarks. So, to introduce, my research question today is, can utilitarianism justify animal rights? But why would I want to ask this? Well, first of all, why animal rights? Well, because of the increasing public awareness around animal issues. We're going to talk about this later, about why this is the case and what animal rights might mean, but it is important for now to just understand that the idea of animal welfare and animal rights is of increasing importance and of increasing public awareness in the modern world. Okay, so what is utilitarianism? Well, utilitarianism is a very important and influential ethical view containing a multitude of interesting perspectives, and it's one that you wouldn't usually think of as being able to justify rights, so I want to explore whether it perhaps could. So now I'm going to do a better explanation of those two concepts, animal rights and utilitarianism. So animal rights, what are animal rights? Well, animal rights would be like human rights, but applied to animals. So there are, in our modern legal understanding, at least in the Western world, fundamental rights that nobody, no state, no person can overturn, even in the case of overwhelming utility or necessity. For example, the right to life. And there are some exceptions to this, but that's broadly speaking the theory, that there are some things that the government cannot do and that people cannot do to each other. So animal rights would be that, just applied to non-human animals. And this is an ongoing debate within ethics, within politics, and within political philosophy, spearheaded by various pro-animal rights movements. For example, here in the Netherlands, there is the PVD, the Party van de Dieren, or Party for the Animals, which is a party in the Tweede Kamer, in the lower house of the Dutch Parliament, that is actively campaigning for animal rights. And the animal rights movement is picking up steam for a number of reasons. One is environmental. As we as humans are becoming increasingly aware of our environmental impacts, one of the ways we could reduce that is by farming less animals, because the farming of animals is incredibly environmentally inefficient. This is also a reaction against the conditions that animals will find themselves in under modern farming practices. For example, chickens these days usually or often cannot support their weight when they are slaughtered because they are forced to put on so much weight unnaturally quickly that their bones cannot handle it. This is clearly, unnecessary suffering. And on the topic of being unnecessary, the use of animals, at least today, is a choice, and that is confirmed by the existence of vegans and, to a lesser extent, vegetarians. Okay, so with animal rights defined and a brief explanation of the relevance of animal rights, we can move on to utilitarianism. So, utilitarianism is a very influential ethical view with its origins in early 19th century Britain. The first modern utilitarianism was a guy called Jeremy Bentham, who we will be discussing later, as previously mentioned. Utilitarianism is a teleological or consequentialist view, which means it's only concerned with the outcomes, not really with how you get there. A teleological view will have an understanding of the good and of the bad, and then under the teleological view, the right, so what you ought to do, is whatever maximises the good and minimises the bad. For utilitarianism, the good is pleasure or happiness, the bad is pain or suffering, and so the right is whatever maximises pleasure or happiness and minimises pain or suffering. With that brief explanation of utilitarianism out of the way, we will move on to our three perspectives, three very influential utilitarian philosophers, and what they might tell us about animal welfare and animal rights. First, Jeremy Bentham. As mentioned previously, Jeremy Bentham was the first modern liberal in early 19th century Britain, and he was the founder of the school of hedonistic utilitarianism. This is a utilitarian view which is very much the classical view. It's what the average person thinks of when they think of utilitarianism, in which we do whatever we must in order to increase pleasure and decrease pain. And it doesn't matter how that pleasure and pain is distributed. This can, of course, lead to some horrific things being justified as moral. If, for example, it would make one person very, very happy, you can make 9 people very, very unhappy by doing something fundamentally immoral to them. And this has made utilitarianism less endeared among the general population than it otherwise could be. But of course, it's a very interesting and one perspective of utilitarianism. Now, on top of animal welfare, Bentham is credited with saying, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? And under this understanding, animals should be brought into that hedonistic calculus, that utilitarian calculus, because they can suffer. And if all we're concerned about is increasing happiness and decreasing suffering, or anything that could suffer should be brought into that calculus. But on the issue of rights, Bentham is also credited as calling rights nonsense on stilts. He did this in response to the ideologies behind the French Revolution. For Bentham, as mentioned, the ends always justify the means, which means putting unnecessary restraints on your means through rights makes no sense. And so for Bentham, the rights are very hard, if not impossible, to justify. So for Bentham, animal welfare may be justified, but animal rights it would be far harder to find an argument in favour of. So we move on to our second utilitarian philosopher, and that is Peter Singer. Peter Singer is a very influential contemporary ethicist, and the founder of the school of preference utilitarianism. Under preference utilitarianism, the good and the bad is not just pleasure and pain, but instead we take into account people's preferences, in which doing what people prefer is good, and doing what people do not prefer is bad. So we weigh up what is the most preferred option, and what is the least preferred option, and we do the most preferred. But in doing so, we also look at the strength of people's preferences, and that might mean that, for example, the preference to stay alive is more important than other preferences. This allows us to make more of a hierarchy than under the hedonistic utilitarianism, and so it might be harder to justify killing something in order to, for example, have good food for yourself, in order to have something that tastes good, if you could get adequate nutrition from other sources. Singer is also the creator of the view of effective altruism, and under this view, we should always help others, unless it would mean giving up something of equal moral worth. So let's say we like to have a coffee in the morning, and that costs us €2. If that €2, if given to a malaria charity, could stop somebody from dying of malaria, well then our coffee is clearly not morally equivalent to that person's life, and hence we should give up that €2 to the malaria charity rather than keep it in order to buy our coffee. And so this is obviously a very altruistic view in which we see ourselves we see all humanity very objectively, and we don't unnecessarily favour ourselves. And this also influences Peter Singer's view of species, and he credited the term of speciesism. Speciesism he defines as arbitrarily giving humans more moral worth than non-human animals. For Singer, humans throughout their history have arbitrarily given themselves more worth than animals, and there's no reason necessarily to do this. There may be situations in which the concerns of humans are more important than the concerns of animals, but to always assume this is the case without adequately justifying it is, for Peter Singer, speciesism. And so for Peter Singer, it is even more easy than under Jeremy Bentham to justify animal welfare, but we still can't fully justify animal rights because the strength of the preference of so many humans might power, the strength or the preference of some animals, and allow us to do things that would be against the concept of animal rights. And so lastly, we move on to John Stuart Mill, who is arguably the first social or progressive liberal, and also important for the liberal socialist movement. He was the first British Member of Parliament to campaign for women's suffrage, and wrote in his later editions of his economics book, Principles of Political Economy, about the merits of worker cooperative enterprises. Now, he is the founder, or at least credited as being influential, in the school of rule utilitarianism. In rule utilitarianism, you devise rules that in the long run will promote the greatest utility. This is different to the act utilitarianism of Bentham and of Singer, in that you don't judge individual actions by the utilitarian outcome. Instead, you devise rules that, as stated, should, over the long run, provide the greatest utility. And so here you can provide constraints to actions, and while those constraints should ultimately create the greatest utility, you can create a sort of quasi-deontological view, or rule-based view, based off of the deontological ethics of utilitarianism, the teleological ethics of utilitarianism. And so J.S. Mill, in this way, used utilitarianism to justify fundamental rights. For example, in his essay on liberty, he used utilitarianism to justify free speech by arguing that whether somebody is correct, partially correct, or entirely incorrect in whatever view they are expressing, there is a utilitarian benefit to society in them expressing it. Now, because he justified rights on utilitarianism, there are some concerning implications that Mill came to. For example, he stated that rights are only good for people who can use their liberty well, and so for other people, they should not have rights, and the exceptions that Mill had here were children and so-called barbaric peoples, by which he meant non-white people. He thought that non-white people should be ruled over by white people until they had developed their cultures and civilizations enough to be able to take advantage of the liberty that would come from having rights. This is clearly a racist, imperialist, and overall disgusting view that should be rejected out of hand. But the fact that he was able to justify this view based on a utilitarian view of rights shows us that we may have to be concerned about justifying rights on utilitarianism if they allow people to make exceptions. Nonetheless, not disregarding that, but keeping it in mind while moving forward, we can say that it is possible to use utilitarianism under the view of rule utilitarianism to justify animal rights if animal rights creates greatest utility in the long run, which quite clearly we can see that it probably would, if it would reduce the suffering of billions of animals being slaughtered each year, for example. So in conclusion, it is possible to justify animal rights on utilitarian grounds. However, not all utilitarian positions allow this, and indeed the vast majority will not. Furthermore, there may be other ways to justify animal rights. Those might be better and stronger if we want to ensure that animal rights will be able to defend themselves against the critique of, for example, animals not using their rights well enough. And furthermore, of course, we may not want to actually have animal rights. I am here assuming that animal rights, or at least animal welfare, is a good thing, but of course there are entirely respectable views of political philosophy and ethics that would disregard animals entirely. What can be seen, however, is that given the increased awareness of animal welfare issues and the increased calls for animal rights amongst the general population and amongst civil society, this is an important question that will have to be looked at further. Both, can animal rights be justified, and if so, on what grounds?